Stop what you're doing. It's time for cheerful history banter with Alex and Abs of the History Tellers.
Hello, everybody. Hello. We're back. It is History Tellers. Yes, indeed, ladies and gents. Hello there. Abs here. Alex there. Hello, Alex. How are you?
I'm all right, Abs. How are you?
Yeah, it's just been a busy old week doing stuff that I can't yet talk about, but we'll be able to talk about in a few weeks' time. Yeah, so it's been all right, actually. Still getting sort of stuff done on the house. I've just made a little film, History Tellers viewers, for the Royal Armouries about the foundation of the Home Guard 80 years ago this week. So if you want to go onto the Royal Armouries YouTube page and have a look at the little Home Guard LDV, Local Defence Volunteers film, I'm there wearing this hat.
We'll put a link in the comments below. Yep. So down there somewhere.
We shall. How are you? How are you getting on, Mr. B?
Very good. I've been doing bits and pieces at home as well. My big sort of news is I've ordered new computerware to do better at home video stuff.
Excellent.
Which will probably all go horribly wrong, so I wouldn't hold your breath, folks, but something will happen.
Well, I'm always going to be there to hold your hand and bring you on in the ways of video.
Metaphorically, of course, with social distancing, no hand holding currently allowed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What was I going to say today? Oh, did you see that picture of the cats social distancing? Did you see this?
I've seen several, in fact.
It's brilliant.
Over the past few weeks.
It was this picture of, where they draw the circles on the ground to stand on in a queue. The cats had sat within the circles, and they were in this long line, and they'd just chosen to sit in these circles. It was brilliant, and it is one of those things that I never would have thought that all around the world people would be drawing circles on the ground and people would automatically just be standing in them. It's just something that you've never thought would have happened, but here we are in the middle of it.
There we go.
History Tellers viewers, excuse all the paint on my hands. I've been painting the gable ends of my house, and it's been a bit frantic, really. So, Mr. Burnham, good. Do you want to tell us some history stuff?
Yeah, I was going to tell you. Now, we sort of missed a week, so it's not overly perfectly timed, but we recently had VE Day celebrations within the UK.
Yeah.
Which, of course, is Victory in Europe
with a very small C, because it was meant to be a big all singing, all dancing, quite literally, kind of spectacular, wasn't it? With kind of 40 singers, because we love 40 singers, don't we, Al?
We do, but yeah, it didn't really happen because of lockdown. But we had VE Day, Victory in Europe Day. Yeah. What I quite liked, somebody, now I've forgotten who, so I can't sort of credit them, but somebody said we should be renaming Victory in Europe Day Peace in Europe Day.
Absolutely.
Largely because I like it. It gets rid of that whole idea that we're the winners, they're the losers, which isn't really brilliant.
Never felt right.
But also, the acronym would be Pie Day. So we can all have Peace in Europe pies, which I liked. But that's not my fact. No. So we remember, obviously, the Victory in Europe Day. Now, Bletchley Park, which is a really good museum about the code breakers, which is down in Bletchley, just outside Milton Keynes.
Very helpful.
They've been releasing some of the codes that were decoded, some of the messages. And the last message that Bletchley Park decoded before the war stopped was released on VE Day to the public. They've announced what it was. And I thought it was quite a nice little message. You'll have to look up Bletchley Park to find the full details, but the final message that they decoded from the German radio operators basically said, "Closing down forever, all the best, goodbye," which I just thought was a nice little final message from the German sort of radio operators.
I read somewhere, this is horrible actually, the Germans, I think it was in Holland, when Holland was liberated, a German garrison just went out and shot loads of people in the streets. And it was like, they did it purely for a kind of knee-jerk reaction to the fact that, oh, well, we're just going to go and kill people. It was literally like, it's a bit like the story we do about like the last man to get killed in World War One. You know, your city is being liberated and the Germans are on their, you know, the way out. And the Germans just went out and these guys, I think it was like 30 or so people were killed in the streets. And again, we'll see if we can find some details of this as well. But the Germans acted appallingly. There was no, you know, things are not very good. They just went and you know, let's just jack it in. They went out and it was like this appalling bit of, what's the word I'm looking for? Malice and vengeance and petty jealousy and all of that. So it has been a bit of a bittersweet week, really, in that respect, of looking at the joy of victory in Europe and then looking at some of the real sadness of people who were so close and then lost their lives.
I think in general, VE Day is a very bittersweet, because obviously you celebrate the end of war, but you've got to think, well, you can only celebrate that after the war has happened, and so you've had all of that go on before. So it's not really a celebration in the best sense of the word, is it? More of a commemoration.
And it never felt right to me to turn it into a big kind of street party thing, because I'm not saying we shouldn't remember. I'm just saying that it doesn't feel relevant in that respect. And I was you know, much as I hate the idea that the world is being run ragged by COVID-19, and I wish it wasn't, obviously, but I just didn't want to see that big flag waving 40 singers Lindy Hop dancing in the street thing, which it just didn't feel relevant to the message that I wanted to see put across. Anyway, rant over.
Yeah, shall we move on?
Move on.
I think, have you got a This Week in History moment?
Well, I do, but I'm going to hold it off because my This Week in History, it ties in to something that is really interesting. So I'm going to come back in a little bit and talk about that in a bit, okay?
Okay, then in that case, how about I do my quiz questions?
Quiz questions? We can do our quiz questions. It's the quiz, ladies and gents. I know you love
Very
the
good.
quiz.
Right. Grab your pen and paper, ladies and gents. I've got a couple of quiz questions. Abs has got a couple. Let's see how you do. Now, the first one, nice and simple. It's a sort of a straightforward answer. What was the name of the ship that brought the news of the Battle of Trafalgar back to Great Britain? So after the Battle of Trafalgar, a ship went ahead of the fleet to bring the news to Great Britain. What was the name of that ship?
Okay, my first question, ladies and gentlemen. What was the name of the ship that brought the news of the Battle of Trafalgar? Now, I think Alex probably went on to the Radio Times history quiz just before we came on.
No, actually, I asked this question in our family quiz night on last Thursday or something.
Well, amazingly, ladies and gentlemen, my question is exactly the same, and we haven't planned that at all.
So bonus points there, right? Yeah. Sorry, folks.
Yeah.
I can even prove it. Here is my original quiz sheet from. I'll try and do this without. Look, there's the date that I did these. So you know. Never mind.
When I was writing my question down, ladies and gents, I was thinking, what if Alex picks the same question? We have.
Shall I ask a different one?
What?
Do you want a different one?
No, you do yours. I'll just not do my first question. There you go. All right. So, Alex, have you got another quiz question?
I have. Hopefully, nothing to do with the one you've got.
It better not be.
Who was? I'm worried now. Who was the only Pope to be British?
Good.
What's the name of the only British Pope? There we go. As long as Abs isn't asking any Pope questions, we're probably okay.
I'm not asking any Pope questions, though, ladies and gents, I'm sure that Dudley Pope, the naval author, would probably know the answer to the question I'm going to ask now, which is, ladies and gents, which ship in the Royal Navy, this is my second question, but obviously I'm not doing my first, which ship in the Royal Navy is notorious for having the most bloody mutiny on board? It is, to give you a bit of a clue, a character from Harry Potter. Also,
do you know what's good, Mr. Wisdom?
What?
I almost asked this question myself. I read this about a week ago and thought, oh, that's good. I've saved it in my to be asked in History Tellers in the Future file.
Well, there you go. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. That just shows that even with social distancing, we have got this kind of mind melt going on. There you have it. Across the vacuum of space, minds immeasurably greater than our own were plotting and planning, and slowly and surely they drew their plans against us.
Their plans to ruin our quiz by making us ask the same question.
Yeah, so there you go, ladies and gents. 3 questions for you, nearly 4, but our amazing history tellers hive mind.
Almost only 2. That didn't work. Maybe we need to liaise on quiz questions in the future.
So, ladies and gents, we're going to go to a break, believe it or not, where we will sit there and go, what the hell happened there? But when we come back, Alex is going to tell you his first story. But in the meantime, keep that in mind, my last question, because when we come back at the end and we do the answers, I'm going to be telling you that story, and it is a cracker. So we'll see you after the break, ladies and gentlemen. Don't go away.
History Tellers Lockdown Chit Chat.
Welcome back, History Tellers viewers. Now, Mr. Wisdom, hopefully we've not doubled up on this as well. Have you got what's happened in the news in history this week moment?
Yeah, I sort of in history, because it happened, about 4 hours ago. And as everybody knows, history is yesterday's, tomorrow's, today.
Exactly.
And, exactly, as we've often said to Dan Snow et al. But so we are going to be telling you. Sorry, I'm moving my mouse there and suddenly thought I'd messed everything up. I'm going to be telling you a story, and it starts with this guy here. See that there? That's not the space shuttle. Now, about 4 hours ago, that launched. That is the X-37B space plane. And you may look at it and go,
Rubbish
wow.
Name.
You what, sorry?
Rubbish name.
Rubbish name. Rubbish name. It is part of Trump's new Space Force. And it is part of sort of force in space or strength in these stars or whatever the whole thing is called. Now, you look at it and you go, oh, look at that. It must be the size of the space shuttle. It's not. It's about the size of a transit van. It's really small. But they launched it today, and it's going to be up in space for like 3 years. No one knows what it's meant to do. Or what it's there for, or no, civilians at least. But it started me thinking about kind of weird secret projects, really. And then I started to think about drones. Now, earlier on this week, I was watching Ross Kemp. And Ross Kemp was doing one of his, Dangerous World things. Top respect to Ross Kemp, I have to say, because he's gone from being an actor to being under fire in Afghanistan, and his stuff's pretty epic stuff. And the British Army were launching these little hand-thrown drones, and kids were flying them on PlayStation controllers. And I thought, that's interesting. Drone technology, I'm going to take it right back, see when it first originates. Amazingly, 1914. And it starts with this man here, who is Wilhelm von Siemens. Now, remember last week we were talking about the Zeppelin attacks, and I said that the skipper of the Zeppelin that Leif Robinson was after, his dad had lived in London, or he'd lived in London with his father and mother, because his dad worked for Siemens. There's the boss. There's the guy he worked for. And Wilhelm von Siemens is a German industrialist, and he has designed effectively a drone to drop a bomb in 1914. And and this kind of blew me away, forgive the pun, when I started to sort of learn about it. So let me introduce you to his design. There it is. Isn't that bonkers? Now, you might look at that and go, that looks like a torpedo in the middle of that. It is.
It does look like a torpedo in the middle of that.
It's a full-size torpedo. And you know how heavy they are, with wings. Now, the wings are made of lightweight wood, and this is not surprisingly called the torpedo. I wrote this down earlier. It is called the torpedo bomb, I think.
Original?
Yeah, so the idea is that you will take it up by airship, release it, and then it will fly by gliding with a tiny wire being paid out the back, in which somebody in the gondola of the airship will steer it onto the target. Now, obviously, it hasn't got any form of camera, so he can't see where it is. He's doing it purely by eye from the airship to the target, X number of miles away. So they start with models, and they start sort of tinkering around with the idea of models, and they make these models which work okay. This is the Germans, obviously, in World War I. Now, by 1915, they have designed these with models, and everything seems to be working. However, the German government, the Imperial German government, sit there and say, yeah, we're not interested, because the war will be finished by the time the design is done. We're going to win the war very soon, so we're not interested. However, by 1916, Siemens is still sort of plugging away at it. And that gives you an idea of the development of what they've done. There's the torpedo, there's this wooden shell. The idea is that the torpedo bomb will be steered onto the target, a ship, in the case of what Siemens is originally thinking. The moment that this structure hits the water, when it's dived into the water, the torpedo, its motor is running from start, will basically just start into the water. This will just disintegrate because it's so lightweight, and the torpedo will be delivered into the target. So it's not like a kamikaze bomb that will fly into the target. The torpedo will go into the water. So it's like a torpedo bomber, but remote. It's quite a clever idea. I mean, very clever for 1915, 1914. So it's a biplane design. Now, for some reason, which I still can't get to the bottom of it, it's a night attack as well. They're going to do it all by night attack. So presumably because it's so lightweight, a pom-pom gun on a British ship could just blow it out of the air very, very quickly. So they're going to go in at night. So the German forces, as I say, aren't keen, but by 1917, so many test flights have worked really, really well with this device that the Germans, now stuck in trench warfare, now losing the war at sea to a certain extent, they say, now we're interested again. So Siemens now get more money, or Siemens Schuckert, actually, who are an aircraft maker. So Schuckert is handling the aircraft side of things, and Siemens is handling the kind of the steering side of things. So they are now developing bigger bombs, and some of these can weigh, and I was staggered when I read this, absolutely staggered. 660 pounds is the minimum weight that they are made in.
Blimey.
Yeah, blimey is the word. 1,100 pounds. Now, most of that's going to be the payload rather than the lightweight biplane. Or 2,200 pounds in payload.
You can see the benefit because aircraft of the time couldn't drop anywhere near that much.
Well, you say that. I shall come on to something in just a moment. Now, in 1918, they launch one of these carrying a 2,200 pound warhead or torpedo, and they launch it from an airship. They've experimented with lots of ideas. Airships, balloons, even big towers that you throw them off, haven't got the height. So an airship at 4,000 feet releases one of these. It takes 4 minutes to glide 4 miles onto the target, which it gets to, and 4,000 feet drop, and they glide it onto the target. Unfortunately, it actually misses the target, and the operator, who's presumably got brilliant eyesight or big binoculars from the gondola of the airship, is turning it around for a second pass to make the attack on the target because he's overshot when the wings fell off and the whole thing was destroyed. Now, you've got to take your hat off to these guys, haven't you? Because that's pretty clever technology. And that was the one there that was called Glider number 7. Glider bomb number 7, it was referred to.
Mhm.
That was the one that fell apart on the way to the target. Now, are you not impressed by that?
I am. It's very good. There was a Second World War system the Germans had, which was very, very similar.
Now, is that the Wasserfall missile, the anti-ship missile?
It could be, yeah. I'm not.
That had its own power, didn't it, as I recall?
Possibly. I can't remember if that was on a wire or whether that was radio controlled, but it was a similar.
Well, yeah, that's a good point. Now, the Americans,
similar theory.
Yeah, the Americans in World War II, they were stuffing B-17s with explosives, and they were flying those remotely onto target.
The B-17. Yeah.
There's that epic footage. You'll have to find that on YouTube, folks, of a B-17 being radio controlled, crashed into a hillside full of explosives. And
although I believe that never went into operational use, that was just testing.
I believe they were called the Aphrodite missions. And the Americans did use those, I believe, against targets in France, because I've got a picture somewhere of an Aphrodite bomber going into a target.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in.
I didn't think they got operational, but maybe they got tried.
It's in the Mighty Eighth. Roger Freeman's The Mighty Eighth. Picture of an Aphrodite B-17, ladies and gents, packed with explosives, radio controlled onto a target as a completely empty of people. Obviously, I think the pilots bailed out. Actually, I think the pilots bailed out, and then
they took off with a pilot, and then they bailed out, and it was flown in by a second B-17 alongside.
I think, we will look that up. But in the back of my mind, I'm pretty sure the Aphrodite B-17 was used as very rarely. So, top respect to the Germans for developing the aerial launch torpedo. Now, just before we leave, you said earlier they don't have an aircraft big enough. Yes, they do.
Ah, very good.
Siemens shook out as well. Look at that. That is easily the width of 2 Lancaster bombers. Those are people. We'll put that up on the screen.
Yeah.
People. That's a man standing on the top.
What's that called?
I don't absolutely know. It came up on the article about the torpedo bomb, but I'm not 100% certain. We'll look that up for you.
They had was it the Gotha bomber, which was a pretty big.
Gotha's probably not that width. Yeah, Gotha's are, and the AEGs and the Friedrichshabens and stuff like that. That's just a big bomber for World War One. That's enormous.
No, that's huge. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good.
So there you go. Now we go from the sublime to the ridiculous. I just wanted to put a picture of that up. Isn't that ridiculous?
Looks like a GB racer type thing, doesn't it?
It does. Believe it or not, it was not particularly successful. It's the Flea. It's armed with one MG Maxim machine gun, or Spandau machine gun, 792 caliber machine gun. And it's about 110 miles an hour, so it's not the fastest aircraft on the Western Front. Not surprisingly, the pilot can't see where he's going. But that is, if you want to look that one up, ladies and gents, that's the DFW T-28 Fleur that was referred to as. I put it in there purely because I just thought, what an amazing little aircraft. And it turned up in the whole sort of weird designs of World War I. And that's
a funny looking thing, yeah.
That's a program in itself, isn't it? The sort of weird stuff from World War One. So,
weird stuff in general would be a good program, I think.
Yeah. Well, in fact, our friends at the Chalk Valley History Festival, they put up some mad stuff last year, and they were sort of bombs that were very strange in their guidance mechanisms. That's all I'll say, in case we use that in a future program. So, so there you have it. The older space plane flying around the Earth at the moment, and will be for the next couple of years. But it's whilst it's a revolutionary technology in space, but the Germans were very much there in World War One with their torpedo bombs of the First World War. Not surprisingly, completely abandoned after the war finished. No one took that idea up until the Nazis did later on, as Alex has already said. So there you have it, ladies and gents. Good one.
Very good. Interesting stuff. It sort of links to my first story as well.
Okay.
Which is quite nice. For my first story, I'm going to stay in the First World War. We're in the World War One, and we're using those big bombers, maybe not the one you had on screen there, but those Gotha bombers and the dirigible airships, the Zeppelins and stuff, bombing London, or Britain in general, but London in particular.
Yep.
Now, when this happens, it's the first time in history where, certainly Britain, but the home is starting to be attacked during a war. Usually wars happen further away, and we're not so worried. Now, for the first time, Britain's being bombed, and so we look about ways to protect our cities. The easy way of doing that is to take either field or naval artillery, point it to the sky, and shoot shells at the things flying overhead.
Goes pretty much, pretty obvious, really.
Exactly, pretty obvious, and thus anti-aircraft guns are born, effectively. But they turn out to be not very good, because hitting something that's thousands of feet up in the air is actually quite hard. And sorting out your artillery shells to explode at the right time and all this sort of thing, it's not very effective in general.
No,
we don't shoot down a whole lot with anti-aircraft gunfire in the First World War, certainly not back home protecting. So we come up, like we talked about in the previous episode, we come up with the home defence squadrons to shoot the threats down instead.
Absolutely.
That's all fine. The First World War ends, and we fast forward now to the Second World War. Now, during the Second World War, this idea of bombing British cities, well, it sort of takes off again, excuse the pun, and we have this. We have the Blitz, obviously, where London is pounded by enemy bombers, but we have already decided, we've made a policy that anti-aircraft gunfire isn't effective. Our policy is the best defence is offence. So instead of defending our cities with anti-aircraft guns, we're going to have our own bombers bombing the enemy, and we'll have aircraft up shooting the enemy bombers down. This was how we started. And you remember there's like the quote of the bomber will always get through. The idea that we can't stop them. The best way is to try and push the war to a phase where those bombers can't attack us. However, down on the ground, the general populace start to say, well, you're not protecting us. They start to blame the government for not having the correct protection for the civilians. They start to put pressure on, and the media join in, and there's a whole cry of the government is letting us down. Look at the government letting down our heroes by not protecting us. Now, I say that in that way because it's very current. Obviously, we've had very similar things with the coronavirus, the COVID-19 stuff, where the government hasn't been protecting us properly. But there was a reason, because the protection wasn't working, basically. The anti-aircraft gunfire wasn't working. However, the government starts to get this pressure from the media and from the public, and they're worried that everybody in the cities will just leave and go to the countryside where it's safer. They're worried because that would leave no workers for the factories and the offices. And whereas with COVID-19, we're worried about the economy collapsing because of lack of workers, back then, obviously, they were worried about the war effort collapsing because of lack of workers. So as a way of sort of placating people, keeping them back home, they decided to revisit the anti-aircraft gun idea. Basically, they started to get naval guns and artillery guns, putting them all over London, all over the country, to protect us from those aircraft coming in. And this was done basically against the wishes of the military command, but that pressure from newspapers and that sort of thing forced them into doing it. So as it is, we end up with guns like this protecting our cities.
So are those guns there, are those redundant naval guns? Because I know that outside of sort of cities, there were purpose-made anti-aircraft guns like the 4.5 and things like that. So were those there? Were those kind of an additional support that was put in? And are those redundant guns that were then repurposed to give this anti-aircraft cover?
Yeah, some were purpose-designed anti-aircraft guns because they'd had stuff designed in the First War, and then that carries on because away from the cities and that sort of thing, you sometimes did still get it. but in general, we hadn't gone all out with the protection of anti-aircraft gunfire because it hadn't been effective.
And are we earlier in the war here? Because obviously what I'm thinking about is kind of, 1943, 44 with these purposes.
No, so start of the war. Yeah, start of the war, we didn't go down the anti-aircraft gun route.
Right, fine.
As time went on, more bombing happened, and so more call went out for more protection. Yeah. So we have things like, hang on, that's out of order. We have protection of things,
You've frozen a bit there, mate. Hang on, ladies and gents.
Right.
Hang on. Mr. Burnham. Oh, someone's put a kettle on and stolen his electricity. Hang on. We'll be with you in a moment, ladies and gents. What we might do, ladies and gents, is... He's still there, Mr. Burnham? What we might do, ladies and gents, we're going to go to a break, sort out what's going on with Alex, and then we will come back. So we'll be back in just a few moments' time.
History Tellers Lockdown Chit Chat.
Mr. Burnham, are you there? Yes, you're back.
I'm back again.
What happened there?
Yeah, the internet can't quite cope.
Yeah, so that's right. It's now it's glitching us tonight. The gremlins are having a go at us. Not only are they making us think of the same quiz questions, but they are getting to Alex. So, Ali, you were saying about your anti-aircraft guns there in the early part of the war, just set up around the home counties to protect the people of London.
That's right. So we hadn't wanted anti-aircraft guns because we didn't think they were effective. Pressure from the populace and from the media had pushed us into building them. And so now, when the Blitz got into its full swing, we had all these guns shooting down aircraft, or supposedly shooting down aircraft. You see, it was still hard to hit anything. So with all those shells going up into the sky, most of them didn't find a target, and a lot of them didn't explode. Now, basic gravity sort of says what goes up must come down, which meant a lot of shells were falling back onto London unexploded.
Yep.
And when they hit the ground, obviously, they then did explode, and this was starting to cause a problem. In fact, it was killing our own people. Shells were coming down, exploding and injuring, killing, hurting, all sorts, causing damage. So during the Blitz, not only did you have German bombs, you had British shells falling onto London. Now, exact figures are very difficult to sort of work out, but a chap called Simon Webb has recently released a book about this, and he claims that anything up to half of the casualties from the Blitz were friendly fire.
Why are these people in air raid shelters?
Well, obviously some were, but air raid shelters were only a certain amount of protection.
And I'm also presuming that a lot of these shells would just be lying dormant in the street after a raid. So people are going out, moving a bit of rubble, and there's a bang, and they are, wounded by their own shell. Interesting point.
Exactly the same problem that you have with unexploded bombs. You have these shells lying around and that sort of thing. They're small, relatively small as well, so they probably go unnoticed. So yeah, up to half. Now there was about 50,000 casualties during the Blitz. So possibly up to 25,000 of those were caused by our own defences, our own protection, which had been brought in to placate the populace. It hadn't been wanted. And obviously it's impossible to say whether it would have made things better or worse had they not been there, because you can't change history. But certainly an awful lot of people got hurt. Now, it then becomes one of those stories of a sort of cover-up. Not maybe a cover-up in the whole sort of tinfoil on the head style, but during the war, this idea of shells from our own guns falling and hurting people was known and was reported on in newspapers. It was understood. But after the war, it's one of those things that got ignored, pushed to the side, and in the history books you hear maybe 50,000 people in the Blitz hurt, but never say how that sort of breaks down. And so this whole sort of friendly fire angle is written out of history slightly.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was a very interesting point. Firstly, that it's something I didn't understand, didn't know about before I'd read this article. But also the way that pressure from people and from media can change the government's course of actions and sometimes for the worse. And I thought that had real sort of resonance today with the way we are sort of handling crises in modern day England.
It's interesting you talk about fragments of bombs, fragments of shells. Years ago, I was filming on the South Bank in town, in London, and I went down to the river's edge to Mudlark, in my break, at low tide. And you find a lot of, Victorian stuff, or like 17th century stuff, a few Roman beads, things like that. But I found, basically, you were just clearly finding pieces of rusted shrapnel with thread on it and stuff like that. And that's clearly sort of fuses and things like that. Obviously just being blown from the sky, falling into the river and just lying there. And it was good, high quality metal. And our friend Sean, he's passed us real modern day shrapnel, and you can just see exactly the same tearing of where the shells have burst open and things like that. So it could have been bomb fragments, could have been shell fragments, from what Alex is saying there. Interesting one. Very interesting indeed, Mr. B. Very good.
Yes.
Yeah. Shall we do some quiz answers?
Are we there already at the quiz answers?
That was your second story, and
that was my first story.
Was it really? No,
it was.
That was your first story, was it?
That was my first story.
Oh.
There we go.
What's your second story then?
Shall we have another break and then we'll come back and hear my second story afterwards?
Yes, go on then. Let's have another break. I'm glad Alex is here because clearly my script has gone to pot tonight after my quiz question was so roughly stolen from me earlier. I will go to a break and we'll be back in just a minute. Don't go away, History Tellers fans.
History Tellers Lockdown Chit Chat.
So we're back, ladies and gentlemen, on our reasonably chaotic third trip into the world of History Tellers.
We even wrote a script for this one that's gone horribly wrong.
We write a script it's because I haven't written it in my big boys book of History Tellers stuff. So I've just written it on a scrap bit of paper, and obviously that's where the mistake was made. So, Mr. Burnham, have you got a second story for us?
I have, and it's a really good one. I really like this story.
Good, that's brilliant.
Now, some people might know, although we don't make a big thing of it, but Abs and I have a bit of a running collection of airmen and their animal mascots.
This is very true.
We like pilots who have dogs. We like squadrons who have pet lions and foxes and all that sort of thing. It's possibly a topic we'll do something with in the future one day, perhaps. But I want to talk about a specific, and this is an American one, but it's a really, really good story.
Please tell me, is this a squirrel that brings a liberator back?
Very close.
Oh,
very close.
That's the story I want. I want a mammal that brings back an entire bomber when the crew are wounded.
Yeah, not far off. Right.
Go on then.
So, we're in the Second World War. And we are with the 96th Bomber Group, which is the American United States Army Air Force Bomb Group. And they're flying... very nearly. It's your neck of the woods, certainly.
Yeah,
they're flying B-17s, and they take part in something called the Regensburg Shuttle Operation.
Yep.
Now, this is where they fly out bombing something and they land at a different airfield and they took off. They don't go home, basically. So they fly out from England and they end up in sort of Tunisia, North Africa sort of area.
Wow.
And that was their flight out, and then they'll refuel and fly home again later, sort of thing. So this 96th Bomber Group fly out and they land in the deserts of Tunisia, where they'll stay for a little while before flying home.
That is a hell of a long way to go in a B-17.
Probably not a lot different as there and back, to be honest.
Oh, yeah, point taken.
Yes.
Yeah, point taken. Yeah.
But yeah, it is still a long old trip. Certainly, there's no in-flight movie or even closed windows on a B-17. But anyway, they fly out, they do the mission, they land in Tunisia area, and while there, they've got a bit of spare time. They find in sort of an Algerian slum close to the the airfield a donkey who isn't very happy, and they adopt this said donkey. You can see in the picture here, this nice little donkey is a bit underfed, so they feed it up with American rations, and they decide to adopt it as the mascot of the 96th Bomb Group. But of course, they're temporarily in North Africa. They have to come home to England. So when loading up the aircraft, obviously they load the donkey onto their B-17. They take off and they fly home with this donkey on board back to Great Britain. Now they name the donkey Lady Mo. That's her name. And they come home and they return to the British airfield known as Snetterton Heath.
Ah, okay.
Now,
I was literally just Googling where they flew from.
There you go. Well, they ended up stationed here at Snetterton Heath. Now, this is in Norfolk. It is now home to the Snetterton motor racing track.
Yeah.
And you can see this section down here, that becomes what is today the racetrack down here.
Brilliant.
So, the 96th Bomb Group here in Snetterton Heath. And Lady Mo the donkey, well, she's quickly fed up. She becomes very happy, healthy, and is sort of welcomed into the bombing group as their mascot. And they call her the Queen of the Heath. And she's got a bit of a sort of a local celebrity, effectively. She gets well in with all the pilots. She helps them with their sort of fun and activities. There she is painting one of the B-17s. Interestingly, these B-17s, I think it's square C. If you see a photo of a B-17 with a white square with a C in it, that's the 96th Bomb Group.
Yeah.
So there you go. That was her, and she becomes so well known that they even do things like they name the baseball park and the movie cinema on the base after her. That's Lady Mo Ballpark. So there she is, sort of really getting involved in daily life on Snetterton Heath. And they're all quite happy and friendly with her. There she is in the snow, it looks like.
I'd like to also say, colour photograph, period colour photograph, not coloured in black and white.
No, that's a genuine colour photograph taken in period rather than colorised later.
Yeah, which we
so there she is.
Oh, these are great.
Yeah, it's a lovely Lady Mo the donkey, the mascot of the 96th Bomb Group. Pretty good stuff there. I think you'll agree.
Now,
however, I've left the best bit out though, Abs.
Yeah,
what's your question, quickly?
No. I haven't got a question. I wanted to find something to show you, but you carry on talking. No, it's all about where you're talking, but you carry on talking about this. You carry on talking.
Okay. Right. So, Lady Mo the donkey is, popular addition to the popular addition to the I've messed up now, hang on.
Don't worry, sorry, I put you off, but it's because I wanted to show you and our viewers something beautiful at Snetterton, but I'll do it at the end, of course.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, so there we go. Lady Mo, the donkey from Snetterton. She was picked up in Algeria as part of this shuttle operation.
Yep.
Which had the aircraft flying out from Britain, bombing, landing somewhere else, and flying back. What I didn't say was, on that flying back, they would also do some bombing. So when they took off from Algeria, they were loaded up with bombs, and they were going to bomb German targets in the Bordeaux region of France on their way back to Snetterton with the donkey on board.
No way.
So this means that Lady Mo, the Snetterton Queen, Queen of the Heath, is the only, as far as I'm aware, donkey to have flown an operational mission during World War II.
Brilliant.
So there we have. That's
brilliant.
Here we have a lovely picture of some of the aircraft on Snetterton Heath.
Oh, that's gorgeous.
There. Yeah, lovely. Again, a colour photo from the time period. And so this was the only operational bombing donkey that I'm aware of.
Brilliant.
Now, unfortunately, not long after VJ Day, she dies in an accident, but is buried on the airfield. So next time I'm at Snetterton Racetrack, I'm hoping to try and find where Lady Mo's grave is. There's a like a website which apparently helps you locate her grave. So that's my animal mascot story of the day.
That is a lovely, lovely story. I just got up a picture because I live quite close to there, and I drive by Snetterton quite a lot. So, ladies and gents, I just wanted to show you the Snetterton, if you can see that. Let me.
The memorial, yeah, that's a not great picture, Abs. Have you got a... Oh, there you go, yeah.
There we go. It is possibly the nicest memorial that I have ever seen. You've got the Union flag, you've got the American Stars and Stripes, and you've got these stainless steel columns. It's enormously high. And this beautiful B-17, which is about sort of a metre across here, all done in stainless steel, and these sort of 4 contrails. It is possibly, if you're ever going up the A11, just swing in to Snetterton and have a look at this memorial. You will not be disappointed. It is one of the nicest memorials you could possibly imagine. And I live around here, and there's a lot of airfields. And I have to say, that is one of the nicest 8th Air Force memorials you could possibly have. So sorry for breaking Alex's train of thought there, but I wanted just to show, and we'll put that up on the screen as well so you can see that. I just wanted to show the audience just how nice that was. So where are we?
No, it's very good, and it's a really well documented 96 bomb group. There's a lot of photos out there of their aircraft, of their crews, of all sorts. I had a hard time picking which pictures to use for that little section. So if people are interested in Second World War, American Air Force history, definitely have a quick flick through the 96 bomb group, have a look on Google and all that sort of thing. There's quite a lot of really good stuff on there.
Yeah, and don't forget, ladies and gents, before lockdown, Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks were seen in the East Anglia region, and they are prepping for their new kind of Band of Brothers Pacific-style big TV spectacular, which will be called Masters of the Air, and it's all about the 8th Air Force, B-17s and Liberators, B-24 Liberators. So at some point in the
Look out for a donkey in that.
Yeah, and I bet there will be, but it's being based around the airfield at Thorpe Abbots, the 100th Bomb Group. And I drive by there. Again, if you're in East Anglia on holiday at any time, do look out for all of these little airfield museums. They really are fantastic to see. Nice one, Al. That's a very nice one. I do like that story. I've seen a picture of a donkey, a faked up picture of it looking out the side of a B-17, and that must have been
I suspect it may well have, afterwards they may well have taken the donkey on board grounded ones or whatever for photo.
Exactly right. Yeah, so, yeah. What a night. I never knew the context of it. What a great story. Well,
no, it's a good one.
As I say, forgive me for breaking your train of thought by finding that picture there, but I just wanted to
show... Right, this whole episode's been a bit chaotic.
Yeah,
so
that's the nature of the live way that us history tellers work. It started badly when the gremlins made us think of the same quiz question, and it hasn't improved since then. So, quiz questions, Mr. Burnham. Do you want to do some quiz questions?
Yes. So, Mr. Wisdom, do you know the name of the ship which brought the news of the Battle of Trafalgar to Great Britain?
Yes, I do.
That's how we got the same answer.
It is yes, exactly. It is HMS Pickle, isn't it, Mr. Burnham?
It is HMS Pickle.
It is
there we go.
HMS Pickle, and there it is. There's a replica of it, at least a nice little replica. But HMS Pickle, yeah, absolutely. And to give you the full story there is the plaque. And where is this plaque, Mr. Burnham?
It's where we were at the start of the year before we weren't allowed to be anywhere.
Yes, exactly. The only event we've managed to do this year. We were down at Pendennis Castle in Falmouth, and indeed Falmouth is where the news was carried in. So the story, are you going to do the story of Pickle, or shall I?
No, go ahead. I did the answer, so there we go.
She was laid down in 1800, was HMS Pickle, and on board after the Battle of Trafalgar was Lieutenant John Richards Le Penetier. And she was a little schooner, so she was fast and she was quick. And Admiral Collingwood, instructed the Pickle to take the news of the victory at Trafalgar, which of course saved Britain. It was like the Battle of Britain of its day, really, because everybody just thinks it's a naval engagement. It was a naval engagement as a sort of precursor, really, to to Napoleon trying to invade Britain, really, and the French trying to invade Britain. So it was a big deal. Trafalgar was a big deal, and he lands at Fish Quay, I think it was, Fish Quay at was it Fish Quay? I think it is, yeah, he lands there in Falmouth, and he took 38 hours to whiz inland and get up to London.
I can believe it.
Yeah, to take.
Having had to drive out of Falmouth, I can believe it would take 38 hours. You probably got caught on the roundabouts like we did.
Well, what always makes me laugh is me and my partner used to watch Poldark, and he would say, "Well, De Melzer, I have work in London," and then he would just be gone for like a few days, and then he'd be back, and it was like, no, you would have got as far as Liskeard. That would have been about it. You would not have got to London in like a day. It took a week, according to the story I have here. It took a week to get to London, but the news was carried of the great victory against the combined forces of Spain and France, but also, sadly, of the death of Nelson. And he was just the biggest hero you could possibly imagine. So there you have it. That is the story of Fish Strand Quay. I was looking for it there, but it's...
There you go.
Written there in huge writing.
Big writing, yeah.
Yeah. So there, a combined quiz question for you, ladies and gents. I hope you had fun with that one.
Right, shall I do my other question then? Yes, right. My second question was, who was the only Pope to have been born in Great Britain? Any idea?
I think he's going to be really early. I think he's going to be in late Roman times, I'm going to say. Am I anywhere near right?
Not really, no. His name was, of course, Pope Adrian.
Oh, right.
But rather worryingly, Pope Adrian IV, Adrian being a particularly Catholic name, supposedly. He was Pope between 1154 and 1159. That's the years, not the hours. He wasn't just Pope sort of a little bit before lunchtime. It was for a few years. And his real name was Nicholas Breakspear. But as with often these things, they rename them when they become Pope.
Isn't there a beer called Breakspear?
There is a beer called Breakspear, there is, yes. I don't know if it's related to him. And I've forgotten to write down where he came from. I think it was somewhere very ordinary in Great Britain. But yes, he worked his way up through the ranks of Catholicism until he became Pope, and is the only, to this day, British Pope. So there you go.
I didn't know that one at all. That's a good
Pope Adrian.
Related question. Very good indeed. Well, my second quiz question is all about this. Which ship is notorious in the Royal Navy for having a very bloody mutiny on board? Also a Harry Potter character. It is not HMS Death Eater. It is not HMS Worsley or whatever the boy's name is, Weasley.
Is it HMS Dobby the Elf?
It is not HMS Dobby the House Elf. It is HMS Hermione, ladies and gents.
Of course.
And it's a crackingly good story. So when I was reading up about this, I just thought, oh, it's going to be a good mutiny story. My God, it's a really good mutiny story. So I want to take you now to a 32-gun fifth-rate ship, so not a big one like HMS Victory. It's going to be a bit smaller. The year is 1782, and on board is a man called Captain Piggott. Alex, you know this story because you were going to ask the same question.
A little bit. Don't test me too much.
Is Captain Piggott a nice man?
I'm going to say no.
He is a horrible man, ladies and gents. Now, Captain Piggott is just an absolute martinet in the way he runs the ship. No one likes him, particularly not a junior midshipman. And of course, in the early 18th or late 18th century Navy, a midshipman is a young officer, gentleman officer. So he's going to be quite a young lad. If you've seen that movie Master and Commander, Max Purkis plays this sort of, I don't know, he's about 12 years old or even younger than that. And they are in command of grown men, but they are very much kind of young gentlemen, children, effectively, in uniform, very junior officers. Now he, the midshipman, whose name is David Casey, his sort of charges, his guys that he was in command of, were on one of the tall masts. And he brought his men down from aloft, whereupon one of the men hadn't closed over a particular part of the mast arrangement that he should have done. And of course, Pigott picks up on this and says, you know, these men haven't done their job properly. You were in charge. You're the man whose head is on the block. And in normal circumstances, being gentlemen, being officers, he would be chastised for it, but a fair captain would have, you know, given him a hard time and maybe taken a rum ration away from the men to remind them to, you know, not mess up. He makes the midshipman kneel and say sorry. Now, the midshipman is an officer. You don't make, in the 18th century Navy, you don't make a young gentleman kneel on the deck and say, I'm sorry. He accepts he's wrong. He should have made sure that the guys had done their job. But this horrifies the men because the young midshipman is popular amongst the crew. And, you know, it's a terrible thing to do, but Pigott insists. Now, to the great credit of the lad, of the midshipman, he refuses to do it. He says, I'm not going to do it. And Pigott says, I insist you do. By now, you know, tempers are beginning to rise. Now, as I'm sure you know, Al, you've got Royal Marines on board the ship who are there to, you know, keep order. But the Royal Marines are beginning to think there's a lot more sailors on board this ship than there are us. So tempers are beginning to fray. Now, it hasn't helped in the running of HMS Hermione that Pigott also would make men race to come down from aloft. So when you're coming down those shrouds and all the ratlins and all that sort of stuff, obviously the men who are all the way out on the longest yard, who are furthest out when they are hauling in the sails, obviously they are going to take longer to go along the tow rope all the way to the centre and then bring themselves down. Obviously it's going to take them longer. And men are racing to not get flogged to be the last man down, because that is what Pigott will do. He will flog you if you are the last man down. Two men racing to get down first fall to their deaths on the deck, one of them wounding one of the officers as he fell and died. So Pigott now blames the dead man for wounding the other officer while he fell on him from above. So I'm beginning to paint a picture of Pigott here that he's not a particularly nice man.
I don't think so, no.
No, he's mad, to be quite honest. He is insane and unpleasant. So the men have had enough. And it's just, you know, it's getting to the point at which the men have said no more. On the 21st of September, 1797, the men, 18 of them, just generally who are the most vicious of the lot, they break into the cabin. They are drunk on rum, which they have stolen. They overpower the Marine who's guarding the door of the captain's cabin. It's night. They break in and they stab him and cut him up. It's pretty grim. They don't just kill him. They chop him up. They stab him. They do all kinds of stuff. And they throw him overboard. Now, they don't just stop there. And I'm not going to say at this point the men are conducting themselves with any honour at all, because unfortunately they kill 18 more officers, including two of the midshipmen, not the one they like, obviously. One of the men they kill, they throw overboard, and he comes round because they throw him overboard, one of the officers, and he gets stuck on the sort of one of the out jutting pieces of the ship that stick out on the outside of the bow. He climbs back on board and they kill him as he gets back on board. So, you know, he was mortally wounded, but he got back on board using all his energy, and they kill him. It's pretty grim stuff, I have to say. Yeah. The whole of the deck of Hermione is a bit of a bloodbath. So you've mutinied, you've gone against the rule of law. There's a lot of men on board the ship who don't, you know, they literally get out of their hammocks and find that the ship is now no longer in command of the officers. What would you do if you were those mutineers, Al?
Oh, well, you've got a couple of choices here. You could give yourself up and sort of throw yourself on the mercy of the court.
They're not going to do it.
Or you could turn and run a la Mutiny on the Bounty style, look for somewhere to hide.
Absolutely, and they turn and run. They run to Spain, who, of course, at this point is an enemy of Britain. So they run to Spain and they hand themselves over, and the Spanish say, "What? Do we get the ship free as well if we take you on the cruise of Spanish ships as mercenaries?" And they say, "Yes, we do." So you've got to remember that some of these men had no hand in the mutiny at all. Now, the Spanish say, incidentally, where are all your officers? They go, oh, we stuck them in an open boat and sent them packing. No, they didn't. They literally fed them to the fish. So now you've got all of these men and the ship in the command of the Spanish. And the Spanish rename the Hermione the Saint Cecilia. So you are the Royal Navy. You know that the old Hermione is now called the Saint Cecilia. You want your ship back and you want revenge on those men who have created mutiny. So what are you going to do?
Well, send somebody after it. Go looking for it.
They do. Now, they can't deal with the same men on board the ship, because not everybody is on board the ship. They've all gone off to separate ships. But bit by bit by bit, they find through bribes and through money and questioning, they find where they find where quite a few of these mutineers are. They bring 33 back to Britain. They bring them back to Britain and they they capture 33 of them, I should get that right, and they hang 24 and then gibbet their bodies in gibbet cages. Some of them are released because they didn't take part in it, but basically it is the most violent end to a mutiny that the Royal Navy has ever seen, but it's also the punishment fitted the crime, because so many of the officers on board Hermione were killed. So we've still got the problem that Hermione is now in Spanish command. So we now need to go and get Hermione back. So Captain Edward Hamilton on board HMS Surprise, which of course is the name of the ship that Jack Aubrey, Master and Commander, HMS Surprise sails into the mouth of the harbour. The crew then get out in little boats and they row up to the St. Cecilia and they cut her out. Basically, they steal the boat by rowing it out under power from the whalers, and they pull the entire St. Cecilia out while boarding her. So they basically go on board and take hold of the crew and all of this kind of stuff. So that is the Hermione. There she is. And that is one of those epic 18th century paintings of the assault on board the Hermione or the St. Cecilia. And there's Hamilton going up on board. He is wounded. He has 11 men wounded. They kill 190 Spaniards as they do the cutting out operation, but they do get her back, and she is given a name. I wrote this down. It's something like the Retribution, I think she was called, when she got back to Britain. So it is an epic story. So the answer to the quiz question, ladies and gents, is
Retaliation. She gets called
Retaliation. There you go. Yeah, yeah. So the answer to the quiz question is HMS Hermione, but the story is just so much better. And it is absolutely brilliant. Now, those of you who like nautical films, we talked about Master and Commander. You may remember the old ITV series, Hornblower. And that may remind you, the story there may remind you of a character played by David Warner in the episode Mutiny. And he played Captain James Sawyer, who is absolutely based by Forrester when he wrote Hornblower, who is based on Captain Piggott. So I'm really keen to watch this episode now.
Yeah, very good. I've got them on DVD, and we regularly dip into them because they're quite good fun. Yeah. I seem to remember there is a plot line. I don't know if it made it to the TV, but maybe the books, where Hornblower cuts out a ship by pretty much the same I
believe that's in Hornblower Flying Colours, which is, I have to hold up my hand and say, probably the only one I've read, where he goes in under cover of an enemy flag on his ship, and then he puts boats ashore and he cuts out a vessel and saves his boat.
It's a while since I've read it, but certainly very similar.
Years and years and years ago, my brother had a boat. My brother lives in the coastal area of Cornwall, and he had a boat stolen. And he knew exactly where it was. It was in the harbour, and it was being used as a tender for a much larger boat. And my brother and I decided that the only way, or the most dramatic way, to get our boat back was to put wetsuits on, and we were going to swim out to it at night in the darkness. And then we were going to cut out my brother's little rowing boat and row it away silently. But then my brother just went, Yeah, what happens when we drown? and then Mum says, so where were they found? In wetsuits, dead, down the coast? Why? So we decided that my brother's little rowing boat probably could just stay with the people who'd stolen it. And we thought it was probably just not worth losing our lives over. So there you go, a nautical story to finish our rather chaotic evening of History Tellers banter. But that went
very good. I like a good nautical story, so I think that's good.
What's the motorsport detective bit on your screen?
Oh, that's not meant to be there. Why is that? Oh, I don't know what's gone wrong. Ooh.
I want to know about that now. Do that next week.
Oh, hang on. What's going on? I don't know.
Don't worry. We finished anyway.
Oh, dear.
Well, that was all a bit mad.
It was a bit.
But hey, do you know what, ladies and gents? That's all part of the History Tellers magic. This is where it happens, ladies and gents. We just sprinkle our little History Tellers magic on you there. And it's...
I think we ran out of magic. It was that week off. We lost touch of what was going on.
I tell you, I could not have done this last week because things have been pretty manic. So, ladies and gents, I hope you enjoyed our History Tellers banter this evening. We have every intention to make these shorter and shorter and shorter, and then we just go on with craziness. So I hope this is probably going to run to about an hour and 10 minutes yet again.
We could edit out a lot of this waffle.
Yeah, yeah. Think clearly, Mr. B. I shall do the same. So, ladies and gents, we will be back as soon as we can. In the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, I've been Ads. This has been Alex. And collectively, we are the History Tellers, locked out of standing in a field with you until, when is it, Al?
Oh, well, at least September, I think, at this rate, but
we
possibly
definitely
longer.
haven't got any bookings until September. So expect a few more of these as the temperature rises and the history stories flow. But in the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, we have been the History Tellers. He's been Alex. I've been Abs. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Yes, very good.
So don't forget to share this video, like the History Tellers Facebook page, and subscribe to our YouTube channel to hear more History Tellers conversations in the coming weeks.